Hello and welcome again. We are going to be studying from Hebrews chapter 12 today. My name is Nathan House, and if I can encourage you to like the video or subscribe, that would be great. And I am with the Church of Christ in Houston, California. So we're getting back into the book of Hebrews. We're almost done with the book. Probably two more lessons or three. We're going to break up chapter 12 into two lessons, so we're only going to do the first part of this chapter today. When we begin here in Hebrews chapter 12, we are immediately confronted with the fact that this is a bad chapter break. I've talked about this a lot. Chapters and verses were added later, and they were not part of the original documents. And so here we have a bad chapter break. Well, why do I say it's a bad chapter break? It begins with the word therefore. So obviously, this beginning of the chapter is pointing back to what has already been talked about. And so real quickly, let's read the first two verses and we'll look back at this for a moment. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. So again, bad chapter break. Why? Again, the word therefore is pointing us backwards. Who are these great cloud of witnesses? Sometimes people are taught, well, these are, Christians, these, your family members. Well, the great cloud of witnesses specifically are these people that are mentioned all the way through chapter 11. These men and women who lived by faith, Abel, Moses, Abraham, Sarah, all of these great men and women of faith who lived their life by faith, who lived their life enduring struggles and hardships and afflictions. Right here it says, beginning at the end of chapter 11, talked about those who were mocked and flogged, chains and prisons, stoned, sawn in two. So they were enduring hardships. By faith, they were living for God, even though they were going through suffering and struggling. And so all of this, all of the beginning of chapter 12, all of chapter 11, if you've been with us, this isn't catching you off guard, but this all comes back to the end of chapter 10. Where he begins this whole discussion on living by faith, enduring hardships, enduring struggles. And so we see this word enduring continually throughout the end of chapter 10, picking up again in chapter 12. Not only are we seeing this idea of endurance, remaining, not giving up, living faithfully. That's the idea here. We also see this quote from Habakkuk chapter 2, which introduces us to this word faith. You see, a righteous person lives by faith. A righteous person doesn't shrink back, doesn't give up in the face of afflictions and hardships. A righteous person faithfully endures struggles, faithfully endures the hardships of this life. Why? Because the faithful, the ones who live by faith, are looking forward to something better. We saw that better all through chapter 11. We see this again. If you look back here, right? We see that he talks about what has been promised. We see this idea of a great reward. Well, why do we live? Why do we endure? Because we live by faith, knowing that there is something better. There is a promise. There is a reward. So all through end of chapter 10, all through chapter 11, there is this concept of living by faith, enduring the hardships. So again, this cloud of witness, these faithful people of the past, they surround us, they encourage us. And in light of their encouragement, the Hebrew writer says, let us lay aside everything that might stop us from running the race faithfully. The Olympics just ended, right? And you watch these people who are running these long distance races, and they run and they run and they run. You don't carry any extra weight when you go on these races. You want to make everything, as little weight as possible. You don't want to carry, you're not going to carry your keys and your wallet and your cell phone on these races. You don't want any extra weight. Lay aside everything that might slow us down to run the race faithfully, to run the race in such a way that we're not going to give up. We're not going to grow weary. So we're not going to be these people who, again, going back to the end of chapter 10, right? We're not going to be these people who shrink back when the race gets hard. Well, why not? Because we're running this race by faith with endurance. We're laying aside all of those things that can stop us, that can slow us down. We're not going to be, sorry, go back one more time. We're not going to be those who shrink back and are destroyed. But we are going to be like Abel. We're going to be like Noah. We're going to be like Abraham and Moses and these people who are this cloud of witness. And we're going to run faithfully this race that is set before us. And as we do this, Jesus Christ himself is something that we can look to. He's that, maybe to kind of give it an image of the Olympics, he's the finish line. We look to him as the finish line. He's done this. He's been through this. And he for the joy set before him, he endured something. He endured hardships and struggle, despising the shame. Why? Because he also knew there was something better, just like we do. So then he again says in verse 3, consider him, Jesus Christ. Consider him who endured, highlight this word endured again, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Why should we consider Jesus Christ? So that, here is a purpose statement, so that we don't grow weary. So that we don't grow weary. See, we're going to struggle. And so he talked about struggling against sin. And I think the idea here is that the sin of giving up. That's kind of fits the context here, that we need to live faithfully, that we need to not give up, that we need to be people that endure. To give up, it would be a sin. He says, in your struggle against sin, this desire to just give up, to grow weary in the race. So we're struggling against this. And he says, you haven't yet shed blood for this. He says, but I want you to consider Jesus Christ so that you don't grow weary. Then he reminds them of an Old Testament quote from the book of Proverbs, that God is going to discipline those whom he loves. We discipline our children, sometimes because they've got in trouble. Sometimes we discipline them to keep them out of trouble. We discipline them. This is not discipline because it's a consequence to their mistakes. Sometimes we discipline them simply to train them. Again, I'm not talking about spanking them, but I have them get up and do the dishes. I have them pick up after themselves. I have them do these things to shape them, to make them better people. You see, I do that because I love my children. God loves us, so he will discipline us. He will try to shape us through what he allows us to go through hardships, through struggles. He says in verse 7, it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. Skip down with me here, verse 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant. But later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been, watch this, trained by it. We need to let God's discipline, see how he uses this whole metaphor of athletics and racing. We need to endure the race. We need to run the race. We need to be trained. All these athletic ideas and concepts are coming in here. We need to be trained by these things. So then in verse 12 he says, therefore lift your drooping hands, strengthen your weak knees. And the ESV translates this as your drooping hands, your weak knees. And maybe that's the idea here, but the Greek doesn't say your. It says, therefore lift the drooping hands. And I kind of think that he's really talking about other people that are running the race. Other people here that you see their hands are drooping, their knees are growing weak. I think in verse 12 he's encouraging us to encourage others. So we obviously all need encouragement sometimes. We need to be reminded, to run the race hard. But there's sometimes in our life where we are there to encourage others. Hey, I have a friend who right now, this is the truth, I have a friend who right now is going through a lot. Caring for his father who is struggling. He's been caring for him for a long time now. And I know he is going through a lot. And so sometimes I need to encourage my friend. Hey, you can do this. You're not alone. God watches over you. God's not unaware of the hardships you're going through. God, if God cares for the little tiny bird that falls to the ground, he cares for you. He cares for us. There's times we need to help others lift their drooping hands. Help others strengthen their weak knees. I think that's what he's calling us to do. Verse 15, we'll talk about this perhaps next time as well, but look at what he says in verse 15. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. You see, we need to help others. See, there's this gift, this glory that's waiting us. There is the reward, the better city, right? Going back to chapter 11, the better homeland, the better city, the better country, all those things which Abraham and Moses were longing for. The rewards and the promises going back to the end of chapter 10. That's there for us. But in order to obtain the reward, in order to obtain what is promised, we have to endure. We have to run that race. Yes, we're going to at times feel, the hand of discipline, sometimes from our own sin. Sometimes we're going to feel that discipline as an encouragement, as something that shapes us. And God does this for our own good. And again, look at what he says here. I didn't read verse 10, but it says he disciplines for our good, or to make us better. Why? That we may share his holiness. Brothers and sisters, friends, we are running a race. We need to, first of all, strengthen our own weak knees and lift our own drooping hands. We have to remind us, going back to Hebrews chapter 10, the very end of that chapter, that we are not going to shrink back. We are going to live by faith. We're going to look to the things. See, living by faith means we're not focusing on the things that can be seen. Living by faith means I'm looking at the things that can't be seen. I can't see my eternal abode, but I live by faith, trusting in that promise. I can't see God, the Creator, watching over me in a physical sense, but I know he does, and by faith I live with the encouragement that I have a God who watches over me. So brothers and sisters, as we run this race, let's lay aside everything that can slow us down. And let's run with endurance that race set before us. Let's look at Jesus as our example of one who endured suffering and hardships because there was something better. There was something joyful that he ran that race for. There is something joyful that we run the race for as well. I pray that you will have a great day. Thank you for your time. God bless.